I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Once again, we're doing another live on the commute. And as a reminder, when doing live on the commute, it means I'm talking about what I remember about the news and will not be able to confirm details on the fly. So treat this as always, basic information and my opinion as to what to take from it. So let's go ahead and talk about the situation in Ukraine. The word we're getting from the front lines is that the situation in Kursk is basically being, I'm going to use the tidy word resolved, after Putin's forces bombed Sudza, basically destroyed all the infrastructure. Now I want to point out that when Ukraine took Sudza, they took it pretty much intact. They didn't destroy the infrastructure, they didn't destroy the population, they didn't do anything but capture the town. And the Russians, in order to capture it back, basically dumped the biggest bombs they had available, short of nuclear weapons, obviously. But yes, the situation in Kherson is not quite resolved just yet. I think the Ukrainians still have some territory they're holding there, but by and large, I think we're seeing the end of that salient there. And overall, I think that's that from Ukraine's perspective, that's probably, it has run its course. It pulled troops from various parts of the front lines. In fact, it's pretty clear, considering the fact that other parts of the front lines are collapsing as Ukrainians take village after village, that the Russians had to reprioritize their best units, including the North Koreans, onto the front lines in Kursk in order to resolve that situation. So the two purposes that are at least obvious to us outsiders are, one, getting the Russians to direct resources from more vital parts of the lines for the Ukrainians, so the Ukrainians could make some progress. And number two, was to be a bargaining chip, a card, if you will, in bargaining with Vladimir Putin. This would have been a very good card to have if they sat down at the table with Vladimir Putin until Donald Trump pretty much snatched all the cards away and ripped them up and tossed them into a fire. So it no longer has a purpose there at the negotiating table. So therefore, there's no reason for Ukraine to continue to hold it from that perspective. So, ceasefire. Let's talk about it for a bit. We already talked about it last time. I talked about some of the possible ways that Russia could respond. Vladimir Putin came back and said, no, we will not agree to a ceasefire, especially not right now, where, as he said, we are advancing on all fronts. Except for he's not, just so we're clear. But, that's what he said. And more specifically, they will not agree to a ceasefire unless Ukraine withdraws all troops from the four regions of Ukraine that Russia claims in its constitution now, that they will withdraw all military hardware and equipment and all claim on them and acknowledge them as Russian territories. They will also renounce all claims to Crimea entirely. So then, of course, that's just the start of Russia's demands to accept a ceasefire. Then it continues on that Ukraine will not use the 30-day ceasefire to do any mobilization, no recruiting, no training. They will also, on top of all of that, they will also not receive any resupply. So no military hardware is allowed to come in during the 30 days in question. So let me ask you this. Do you really think Vladimir Putin isn't going to be reinforcing every line, building more reinforcements and equipment on those lines? I think you'd be a fool to think so. And the way he's setting it up, if he gets the U.S. to get to lay down and accept these terms, the way he's setting it up is basically setting Ukraine up for the next invasion. And that's all the only way you can look at it. Because there's just no way that Ukraine's going to say, yes, we are going to sacrifice our people. Yes, we're going to sacrifice our territory, but he's trying to basically throw an impossible set of requirements back on this ceasefire. Well, that tosses the ball right back into Donald Trump's court. Not really Ukraine's, because Ukraine's already been pretty clear. They accepted effectively a no-condition ceasefire, as long as Russia also accepted a no-condition ceasefire. And if all Vladimir Putin wanted was peace at this point, this would have been a great ceasefire. But he doesn't. You see, Russia's economy right now is so heavily invested in waging war that as soon as the war ends, the odds are their economy collapses outright. And the only question then becomes, can he actually successfully navigate the tiger that is a whole bunch of trained soldiers who know how to use weapons returning home from war with no jobs, no prospects, and a weak economy. Typically that results in a depression, or in Russia that typically results in a revolution. So we'll have to see how this turns out in that regard. Overall, though, the lines in the front would seem to be the Ukrainians are taking back territory in Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and another area of the front line that whose name escapes me right now. The only place there the lines back, and it appears to be doing an orderly retreat, is the Kursk salient. And we've had some interesting reports out of the Kursk salient. One of which was the Russians tried to use a pipeline to sneak into Suza and got absolutely mullered in it. So they ended up with hundreds dead. And of course, the bomb in that area. We're also seeing reports that Ukraine has basically deployed rear guard elements. That's not the. I don't know if that's the right military term right now. It just doesn't feel right. But basically, troops that are to hold back the Russians as the main body of the forces withdraw to better locations. Will the Kursk salient entirely disappear? Maybe. I don't know for sure. But I can tell you that the overall situation there does not look sustainable at this point in time to me from the outside. I've seen a bunch of analysis on it, and a lot of people have commentary on it beyond what I can say, but I think from a tactical perspective, the Kursk salient has run its course. Now, the Russians said, we've already got a huge force attacking at Sumy. There's been zero indications that that's actually true. There were some sabotage reconnaissance groups that the Ukrainians destroyed going into that area. I'm all watching that. I don't truck with that possibility. But let me tell you, from a geopolitical perspective, Lukashenko actually forwarded what the glad to see you, Robbie. Always glad to have you on board. Lukashenko pretty much put out the real goal of negotiations at this point. He said that, and I'm paraphrasing here because obviously I can't have it in front of me. He says, if Russia and the United States come to a deal on energy, it will leave Europe and Ukraine in a bad situation. Yeah, he rejected it pretty much outright. He then added on that the only ways they'd accept it was if Ukraine basically withdrew entirely from the four oblasts, did not do any recruiting or mobilization during the ceasefire, did not receive any military assistance or resupply, and renounced all claim on all four oblasts plus Crimea. Basically stating his maximalist goals for the invasion. So, yeah, he said no. They said, we will accept it, but not on these terms. And then he listed off those terms. Basically said no. So, yeah, he has rejected the ceasefire terms or deal entirely at this point. There have been, Lavrov basically said there's no point because the Ukrainians would use it to resupply, and then who's going. Lavrov was hilarious because he said neither side abuses the ceasefire. And that if the ceasefire ends, who's going to determine who made the mistake? That who ended it? Who caused the ceasefire to end? And no, Lavrov was pretty hilarious. In fact, Robbie, you can look this up. Putin released his statement that he was rejecting the ceasefire under these terms before Witkoff did in Moscow. Witkoff was sent there to basically hammer out some negotiations on it, and Putin released a statement stating no chance, no way, no how, before Witkoff even got wheels down. So at this point, pretty much you might as well just hop back on board the plane and head home, because the Russians have outright rejected it. But yeah, Lavrov was like, well, who's going to enforce it? And then he says, it's unacceptable to have European troops in there. So if you can't put international troops there, like Europeans, who's going to enforce this ceasefire? Well, I'm sure Russia would love to enforce the ceasefire themselves, just like always. But that's what the rejection came down to. I thought there was a good chance that they would delay more than this outright rejection. Honestly, Robbie, I really did think they were going to delay to gain more strategic positioning overall. But now you'll have to see the statement. If I can find it, I'll try and drop a link in at some point. Then there's other things going on that have had the conspiracy theorists up in arms here. I'm going to talk about one of them that gets interesting, but I'm going to state before I start talking about it that I believe this was malfeasance, but not deliberate action. And that is the collision of the Solong, a Portuguese ship. Understand the details on this one got a little bit murky for a while there. I believe Portuguese ship of German ownership, Portuguese registry, German ownership, if I remember correctly, struck the Stena Immaculate, a bulk carrier carrying, a fuel carrier carrying jet fuel under contract with the U.S. Department of Defense. T-boned the side, literally straight on at a full 16 knots. The ship sailed straight into the side of the Stena Immaculate, who was at anchor off the coast of Britain. Now, the conspiracy theorists or tinfoil hat people will be jumping up and down saying, well, the captain was Russian, and most of the crew is Russian, and one of the crew was missing. This is factual. Yes, all those things are facts. However, if you look at the previous trips of the Solong, it's gone that exact same course for the last, I believe it's 5 or 6 trips, down to the exact points at which it goes through. So I put it on good possibility that the ship was put on to effectively autopilot, auto-navigate, and allowed to run, and probably the crew got a little into the vodka, and there was nobody effectively on watch for it. And people have said, well, why didn't the Stena Immaculate see it and respond to it? The Stena Immaculate was at anchor with engines off in a known anchorage with no reason to actually stand up a significant watch. So the odds, even if they had a watch, they would have expected the Solong to divert around them, not to jump into them, not to drive straight into them. And at that point, they probably weren't even running their radar or anything to detect other ships, because they were at anchor in a known anchorage. They had no reason to expect a ship to come plowing into the side. So Lear's going to have to wait for a lot of information on that. As always, Sal Macagliano has some great information on this, what's going on with shipping. I strongly encourage you to go and take a look at that. He generally also seems to think it's not a deliberate act. if it was a deliberate act, it would be about the perfect deniability. Unlike dragging anchors across, pipelines and power lines in the water, there is no accident in that. Whereas the So Long appears to have literally been put on autopilot, and then the crew left it to just do its thing. Unfortunate. I'm not even going to call it. I'm going to call it malfeasance. I'm not even going to call it an accident. I'm going to call it malfeasance. At this point in time, now the Brits did arrest the captain, or at least took him into custody. We'll have to see what comes out of that questioning, if anything. Neither ship, originally I thought the ships had sunk, or at least one of them had. The Stena Immaculate was evacuated, but remained afloat with a significant list. And as I understand it, it was being towed into port. The So Long is being towed into port by its stern because the bow was so damaged and there's so much burning in that area that they're afraid that the bow will break off, is what I understand. So they've been taking both ships into port for investigation and likely repairs. Now the U.S. can just contract up another carrier, get them moving more jet fuel where they need it. It will have virtually no long-term effect on the U.S., not even likely a short-term effect. So there's that whole situation there. No real mumblings out of Turkey lately, although they did make that statement a while back that they were strongly in favor of Ukrainian territorial integrity. We'll see if that pans into anything. Over here in the U.S., though, we've still got lots of crazy things going on. President Trump continues to talk about acquiring Greenland. And now, Greenland had an election, the results of which, by the way, none of the parties that had any significant showing are in favor of the U.S. Taking control of Greenland. Some of them are favorable to independence, though not enough to actually get independence from Denmark. But overall, there's no real change on that front, except for Donald Trump continues to talk about it, including apparently asking for military options. Speaking of military options, Donald Trump has asked for military options on Panama for sure. So that whole situation may be moving forward. I don't have a good feel for it right now, mainly because the bits of news on it are being so buried by so many other things going on. The situation with Canada, I believe it was Doug something or other over in, I think it's Ontario. I apologize for not remembering the names offhand. Kind of folded. He initially said he was going to cut off power to the United States that was transferred across international lines. And then he claimed he was going to put tariffs on it. And as I understand it, he folded. That said, Canada has no motivation to jump in bed with the U.S., especially at this point in time, and especially involuntarily. They have a new prime minister, and he made his first state visit, not to the U.S., but to European Union, showing that Canada intends to align more with Europe than the U.S. And with the way things are going, we could see more of that. Portugal announced that they were, I have a report that Portugal has canceled its F-35 fighter jet order. And instead it's going to be looking at, Eurofighters or Rafales, something European domestic. Well, it's kind of a weird phrase. Native to the European Union. There we go. That's better. So there's fallout. There's real fallout from the way the U.S. has been treating allies lately. And the thing with something like the F-35 and Portugal, and likely I think we're going to see the same happen with Canada. But the thing is that When we sell our military arms to foreign countries, we get contracts with them. For us to buy one, because the production lines can keep running. And if the production lines keep running, well, they get the opportunity for more of them to be sold. Look at the F-22, which was a very limited production run. Only the U.S. operates it. Only the U.S. has it. And so the per unit cost was astronomical. By selling the F-35 to multiple allies, it means that we can get the per unit cost way down instead of having to eat all of the development costs ourselves. So interesting to see. We're going to have to keep an eye on how things go. On the plus side, it does mean Europe is standing up for their own defense. And we've been asking for that for a long time. This could allow the U.S. to pivot to Asia and China, which it is apparent is considered to be the bigger threat at this point in time. I don't think the U.S., this is opinion, I don't think the U.S. is going to be able to peel Russia off of China because they've been partners too long. They have integrated a lot, and China has been supporting, in many ways, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Not politically, but with just selling the material. So I don't think you're going to be able to split Russia from China. And I think that this is an opinion here as well, I think that the deal that we had with India, where they were going to buy F-35s, may also be in jeopardy, driving India right back into China and Russia's arms. We'll see. We will see. It depends on how that whole situation pans out. Overall, that's kind of the situation in the world and kind of what's going on in news. There was just an interesting aside. Oof, bumpy road. There was another plane caught fire on. I don't remember where. It just caught fire. Don't have reports on that yet. The passengers and crew evacuated safely. I think the plane was a total loss. But more interesting things happening in transportation and across the U.S. And the question I'm always ended up with is it actually increasing, or is it just our news cycle is putting it in front of our faces more? And that's what always makes me kind of sit here and go, There's plenty of Boeing issues at the end of the Biden term that you can look at and say, that's bad news. And then we had a rash of them at the start of the Trump term. But the question is, I don't think they were in place long enough to actually have any significant change there. That's going to be the real issue, is where you're going to point the finger for root cause. So we'll watch these things very carefully and very closely. By the way, you may notice that I have my microphone right here attached to my glasses. It's because this gives me the best overall results for the audio. So I think it's kind of silly, but it works pretty well. And I appreciate that it actually gives what sounds like pretty crisp, clear audio when I've listened to the stream going back. And now I'm getting pretty close to my destination, so I'm going to go ahead and call it good here. Thank you for joining me today, Robbie. I was glad to have your comments. Go jump out there and take a look at what Vladimir Putin said. He actually had a statement he gave out. He read out. He made a visit to Kursk as well in military fatigues, though I don't know if that was actually Vladimir Putin or one of his doppelgangers. You tell me what you think. You guys have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on the next video.